In today's video, I'm going to be interviewing the CEO of Arweave, Sam Williams, which is a very promising upcoming cryptocurrency project. I know what some of you are thinking at this point. Oh my God, it's an interview that's going to take an hour and that's such a waste of my time. Personally, I'm a massive fan of watching interviews on YouTube about cryptocurrency projects because it is where you get the best information. The only problem is a lot of the time you do have to watch like an hour video just to get the small piece of information that you necessarily want. Which is why in this video, I'm trying to make it a bit more interesting. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bring you guys a brief review of the project first. That'll be like 5-10 minutes. And then there will be time jumps in the description to all of the questions that I ask. So if you don't fancy watching the whole video, feel free to open up the description and you can jump ahead at any time. I want to introduce interviews into this channel more because they are the best source of information, but they're not very engaging. So I'm going to try and find the balance, and I'd love some feedback from you guys to let me know how this has gone. What I'm really trying to say then is that in today's video, we are going to be interviewing the CEO of Arweave, and hopefully even if you're not a fan of interviews, you might enjoy this video anyway. Hi, I'm Tom from Crypto Gurus, and if you want to learn more, keep watching. First things first, I just want to say a massive thank you to our community, to you guys. You're awesome and you're always suggesting upcoming ICOs for us to look into. Arweave was actually suggested by a member of the community. I looked into it and discovered I was a massive fan, so thank you guys so much for that. If you haven't joined our community, first, have a watch of this video. There's no point joining unless you like the content, but if you do, hit that subscription button and join us in our regular discussion on Telegram. Now we're gonna have to run through the quick disclaimer. I know it's boring, but we have to do it. Remember that nothing in this video or on this channel is financial advice. I'm gonna pop up the disclaimer now. Please, please, please pause the video and have a full read of that disclaimer. The first place to begin then is simply, what is Arweave? Well, Arweave is an infrastructure project and they're building their first decentralized application on top of it, which involves the permanent storage of data. So to break that down, they've come up with their own unique blockchain, which can have decentralized applications built on top, similar to Ethereum, Neo, EOS, all of those well-known projects. And then they are building their first decentralized application, which is permanent file storage. And the main net is actually going to be released early in June. So this is one of those projects where they haven't just written a white paper and are asking for funds. They've actually done significant development and have been building this project for some time now. This is actually a fantastic example where doing an interview means you get much better information than simply doing a review. Hence, I'm trying to take this channel down that path. Because when I read about the project, I thought of it more as they're building a blockchain so that they can focus on their decentralized application, building that permanent data storage. In fact, when I spoke with Sam, he described it was more 80% of infrastructure. So that's 80% Ethereum competitor with your own blockchain and 20% focused on the permanent file storage. If you've been following this channel for a while, you'll know I'm big on infrastructure projects. It's where I believe the majority of the money is going to accrue in the cryptocurrency space. So hearing that difference is very, very significant because being an infrastructure project as their main focus means their value proposition to me is suddenly much larger. So that's a fantastic example why usually doing an interview is better than a review. Now I'm going to highlight just one very interesting aspect about the project. I'm not going to talk about all of it, of course, because that's what's going to happen in the interview. And the aspect that I want to focus on is called the block shadow, because this is what allows Arweave to have very, very high transaction speeds. Essentially, with the majority of blockchains, when a new block is mined, the information in that new block is distributed to every node in the network. In the case of Arweave, they decouple the transactions from the block and distribute a shadow of the block to other nodes, hence the name block shadow. The idea is that by doing this, they take out a lot of the data, and it's very, very easy to send just a few kilobytes of data to other nodes in the network. Less data being transmitted means less congestion on the network and thus higher transaction speeds. These nodes, which only have a shadow of the block, are then able to build the block back up again if they wish, because they have something called the hash list and the wallet list. So basically, to keep it simple, what I'm saying is they send just a very, very small amount of the block across the network to other nodes, and then these nodes have the information necessary to rebuild that block if they wish. So rather than transmitting the whole block, It's a very small portion, and thus it is much faster. So that is one aspect that I found personally very interesting when reading through their documentation. Before we move on to the interview, I just want to apologize to everyone. Usually when I do a review of a project, I've always tweeted out that people should sign up to the whitelist before the whitelist has closed, so that when I do the review, you've already signed up to the whitelist and now here's the review to look at the project. In the case of Arweave, I actually tweeted this information out too late and the whitelist had already closed. I don't want to hide this information from you guys, and I am sorry because I honestly do my absolute best to put out as much information for you guys as early as possible. I don't believe the majority of YouTube channels actually tweet out about whitelists. I'm really genuinely trying to put in this extra effort so that we can all invest together and you guys don't miss out. Sadly, this is one of those examples where I'm only human, I've made a mistake and I've tweeted it too late. However, I'd already agreed to do the interview with Arweave, so I wasn't going to let them down by saying, well, I haven't told my fan base early enough, so I can't do the interview with them. That would be wrong to them. So I have done today's interview anyway. I will do my best always to try to tweet out before the whitelist has closed. Mistakes like this will happen every now and then though, so please do bear with me. Now we're gonna move on to the interview, and I wanna remind you guys again, there's gonna be time jumps in the description, so if you're finding anything not that interesting and you wanna jump ahead, please feel free to do so. I'm also gonna highlight next to specific questions, which ones I think were the tougher questions. So if you'd like to take a look at the questions which are particularly tough and see how they responded to it, that could be interesting as well. Anyway, I'm going to stop rambling now and hand you over to me about half an hour ago. So today I am joined by Sam Williams from Arweave, which is one of the most promising upcoming ICOs. I'm very excited to be talking today with you, Sam. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on. It's great.
No problem. So we'll obviously talk about the project throughout, but let's jump in by just talking about your background. If you could just introduce yourself to the audience, that would be great.
Yeah, so before I started Arweave, I was a PhD student building a decentralized operating system. Yeah, but I've been following the decentralization trend, I guess, for a long time in the crypto space as well as in academia and operating systems, both things. Yeah, and so I saw when Ethereum got started, I took part in the pre-sale, and I was hopeful that we could build all sorts of interesting applications, and it didn't really pan out. I mean, like, you can build some really interesting applications, but not the ones I wanted to build. Mm-hmm. So then, yeah, come around this time last year, and we just sort of got started building the Arweave, and here we are today.
Yeah. So how long have you been in the blockchain space yourself?
Well, I remember Bitcoin passing parity with the dollar.
Okay, a long time ago.
Yeah, yeah, quite a while. I don't really remember, like, 2010, something like that.
Okay, very long time ago. Did you invest at the time?
No, I didn't. There was a real element of cognitive dissonance when the Bitcoin passed the dollar, because I just thought, this is magic money. It's like, can't be worth more than the dollar, right? And now look.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Everyone looks back and says, I wish I put more in.
Right, exactly, yes. I mean, I mined some Bitcoin like a couple of years after that, and then I bought Ethereum with that money. So, like, not done so badly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's jump in and talk about Arweave. I guess the first thing is just, what is it? And why do you believe it's so important to build this project?
Yeah, so the Arweave is a permanent information storage platform. You've taken the blockchain, modified it so that you only need the last block in order to start mining, and then every previous block that you hold, you're rewarded for. And this means that you can expand the size of the data stored on the chain to massive sizes. So you can store large amounts of data permanently on the system.
Okay, so would it be fair to say it's a immutable global decentralized database that like nobody in the world can touch?
Yeah, exactly that. The idea is to build like a permanent store of human knowledge and experience that nobody can alter or remove after the fact.
Okay. For our audience, I think it's good to, because this project is kind of totally new. Like before blockchain, this has never existed, so it might be a little bit confusing for people. Whereas a lot of blockchain projects are kind of equivalent. They're equivalent projects at the moment. So to try and define it, make it a bit easier for people, can we compare it to something like, say, like Filecoin and Seacoin? I describe those as like decentralized Dropbox. what makes your project different? Because I know you're obviously going for something totally different. Maybe easier for them to understand if you could like do the comparison.
So you can definitely use it as a decentralized Dropbox. One of the first applications we've got is precisely that. You like literally drop files on it and it stores it permanently and decentralized. Easy. Okay. There really is no perfect analog for what it is that we're trying to build. Because permanent information storage systems by their nature just haven't existed so far. Mm-hmm. So something like the Library of Alexandria might be a reasonable place to start. It's some massive institutions full of valuable knowledge and information, where the idea is to propagate that information for a very long period of time, except for the information age. So it's kind of somewhere between the Library of Alexandria and the internet itself.
Okay.
There we go.
So like the main difference between you guys and Filecoin and Seacoin is the permanence element. So once something's on the blockchain, it's there in a permanent manner. Is there an ability to kind of have a subsection where that isn't the case? Because if someone's using like a decentralized Dropbox, you might not necessarily want to always have something permanently there forever.
So the answer comes from cryptography, right? Which is that you just encrypt the data, you put it onto the Arweave, and then you delete the decryption key later. And as long as you kept it safe, that is now essentially random data that's stored on the Weave.
Okay, so people could use it as an equivalent to Dropbox in the future?
Yeah, completely. But you can actually access all of the information stored on it, as long as it's not encrypted, through a web browser. So it does have these features that are very much like a traditional internet, except it's permanent.
Okay. Let's talk about a few specific use cases. You guys give 4 in your white paper. I'm not going to put you on the spot and try and name them, but you could go through a few potential use cases if people could.
Yeah, like the 2 major things we're approaching to start with, or 2 major camps even. Look, blockchain projects, blockchain appliances need some kind of place to store their data. And at the moment they're using IPFS, which doesn't have an incentivization layer. And at this point in time, in nearly June 2018, Filecoin isn't going to be around for a while. Mm-hmm. So they need a way of storing that data that's incentivized. We can provide that to them like in 9 days' time. And also our economic model fits much better, right? So the thing that happens in our system is that data is stored into the Weave, and when that happens, miners are then incentivized to store it in order to take part in the mining process, not just as a response to storing it off-chain.
I'll tell you, we'll jump onto the innovations in a second. There's like 4, the block Weave, proof of access, wildfire, and block shadow. We're gonna get to those in just a second. We'll go to the technical side. But I just wanted to...
Can I?
Yeah, you jump in, go ahead.
Yeah. So because our storage has this, is part of the consensus mechanism, that means that it's permanent and you can pay for it with a single fee. Because what's happening is the miners are just expending that value that they would otherwise expend on hashing, on the storage of data. And this means that as a blockchain project, I can put data onto the system. Say one of the early partners that we have is a decentralized auction house. They can put listing data onto the system, and it stays there permanently and verifiably. And then that means that their blockchain, their appliance, remains completely coherent forever. Mm-hmm. Whereas if they store it on, for example, SIA, something like this, then they would have to pay a continual upkeep fee. And because they've only been paid once to perform the listing in the first place, at some point in time, they have to stop paying that upkeep fee. And subsequently, that data is lost, and the information on the blockchain system becomes unverifiable. So we can solve that problem by matching the economic model of the blockchain appliance with the storage. So there's that side of it. But perhaps a more unique element is another one of our early partners is using the permanent information storage that the Arweave provides to essentially... they're a group of researchers from the largest teaching hospital in Europe. They're creating a new kind of academic journal whereby the academics publish their protocol that they're going to perform before they do an experiment, and then they publish all of the experimental data that they collect during the experiment onto the Arweave in an encrypted form. And then at the end, after they've done their analysis and they've published their papers, they publish the decryption key. which means that everyone can go back and verify that what it was that they said they were going to do at the beginning is in fact what they did, and also that they didn't remove information or data from the data set that they collected during the process of the experiment. And that doesn't necessarily sound like much, but there's this thing called the reproducibility crisis in academia, which is basically that we found that 70% approximately of all published peer-reviewed research papers are not reproducible, which means that if we go about and try them again, we can't find the same results, which implies that they're not actually true. There's a huge range of potential reasons that this might be the case, but one of the strong contenders is that people are essentially, in order to, well, bluntly further their careers, they're fishing for results. They go out, they say they're going to perform one thing, it doesn't appear that that actually works. They reuse the same data and they kind of modify it a bit, fudge the edges, until it looks like it says something important, and then they get it published, and then bam, we have inconsistent understanding of reality, I guess.
Okay, I'm glad you brought that up actually, because I have in my notes. When I was looking up, I was surprised to see there's the academic publishing market, which I wouldn't know. I didn't really know anything about, to be honest. But it's absolutely huge. There was the market leader. I think it's called Elsevier. If I pronounced that right. It's something it's the size of about $25 billion a year for that market. Yeah. I was interested to know how you guys view yourself as fitting into that. Are you gonna try to work with companies like that, or do you potentially see your solution as being disruptive and maybe overtaking them in the future?
I think we'll work with them if they want to work with us. If they don't, then we'll do it anyway.
That's a good way to answer that one.
It's a model that hasn't changed since 1850. And it just doesn't make economic sense at all. People outside academia perhaps don't realize that in order to get a paper published, the people publishing that paper typically have to pay it can be £3,000, $3,000, just to get something published in a journal, which really just means putting it on a website where other people can download it. But it's worse, because people actually have to pay to download it, or the libraries end up paying massive subscription fees. They're charging both sides, huge amounts of money, and providing exceptionally little value. Whereas actually what academics really want is they want somewhere that they can permanently, openly publish their information. And we provide that for a few pence. So yeah, there's definitely a big target.
So would you say that's one of your biggest target markets? Or have you got others in mind as well?
First, we're a platform. Developers can access our services, our storage, by a simple HTTP interface. It's really easy to get going with. So we have this dual role as well as building some of those services. We also have to make sure that the people have all the tools they need to have as easy an experience as possible building their own applications, and also that we help support the ecosystem and onboard people. So yeah, we have a kind of split focus in that regard. But definitely academic publishing is one of the things I think is ripe for disruption. Yeah. I can't believe it's got this far, honestly.
No, that was one of the things I didn't really know that much about, but doing the research before this interview, I was absolutely shocked by how bad the system currently is. Yeah.
It really is insane.
Okay, let's talk about your roadmap, because that's one of the most impressive things about the project. I look at ICOs every single day, probably 5 to 10 a day, and at least half of them are basically just white paper projects where they say, this is our idea, let's raise a bunch of money, we have no proof that we can do anything. Whereas you guys have really done it the right way, and you actually have your mainnet is going to be launched before the ICO, isn't it?
No, actually the public sale, which is really just a community sale now, because we had so many people, we had 28,000 people whitelist, so we had to cut down the pool by people that were really interested in the project. But no, that'll be over before the mainnet has launched, and the mainnet is launching in 9 days. So
so it's very, very soon.
Very, very, very soon indeed.
So when did you guys start working on it? If you could just basically run down your progress so far and where you want to take it in the future. Once you've launched the mainnet, what's going to be your main focus from then on?
Yeah, so we started up just over a year ago now. We had a very small seed funding round back in, which by crypto standards was negligible, really fractions of the amount that other people were raising back in August of last year. And then after that, we built out the system from a prototype to a test network, which we launched back in November, I think. Yeah, early November. After that, we got into Techstars Berlin, which is a really prestigious, I guess, startup accelerator. And that was really interesting. Yeah, and then we built out the system, got some partners on board. Now we're ready to launch it in like 9 days.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just, So post-launch, the role is essentially split. There are a few more things that we want to do to the protocol. We want to upgrade the experience of using what we call RQL, which is the querying language that you use to speak to the weave. We want to do some work in that area. And also we want to write our yellow paper. So we had this kind of interesting experience that we wrote a white paper back before the seed sale in August. And we sort of spoke about the block weave, but we didn't speak about any of the surrounding technologies. And we really developed those out a lot in the months that followed. But we were building at the same time, and we were, we verified the protocol, then we built the protocol. But there wasn't much time for actually just writing a paper. So when it got round to, actually having the main funding round, it was just a case of putting together a really brief specification of what it was that we built. And we want to go back and spend some time making totally clear exactly what it is that it does. Because we still haven't publicly spoken about half of it. So that's kind of interesting.
Okay. That'll be good. Let's talk about the 4 innovations, and if you could kind of explain these, not so much from the technical standpoint, so I think that would probably lose me and the majority of the people watching this, but more the business impact, kind of why it's relevant to your project, and how it's going to impact the business. So let's begin with the first one, which is simply just the block weave. How is that different to what exists currently?
It's a scalable blockchain. You can put lots and lots of data on it. There we go.
Okay. Next one is proof of access.
Incentivize miners to store data.
Okay, that's very quick. Next, wildfire.
Incentivize miners to share data.
Okay, so like a peer-to-peer ranking system, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's all well and good building a system that incentivizes people to store stuff, but if there's no incentive for them to give you that data back on demand, then it's kind of useless. So that's why we have wildfire.
Okay, and the final one is block shadow.
High transaction throughputs on a traditional kind of blockchain, where everyone comes to consensus about everything.
Okay, so from my understanding, you kind of decouple transactions from the blocks. You only send like a shadow of each block to each node. So rather than having to send a vast amount of data, you just send a very small amount of data, and then people can reproduce the blocks if they want. Is that correct understanding?
Yeah. So we share all the transactions around in the usual way, and then we wait until we're sure that everyone has that transaction before we start mining it into a block. Then once we mine the block, we just distribute put these transactions in this order, rebuild it locally, and there you go, there's the block. And you can then come to consensus about all that data just from like a 2 kilobyte block shadow, as we call it.
Okay, that's very impressive. Let's talk about the token usage next, because I think I bore my subscribers every single time I mention this, but I do it because there's always new people that come, and people don't really understand when they first come into cryptocurrencies that a token is an entirely different thing for every project. Like when you invest in regular financial markets, a share is a share, which is the same for every company. In the case of tokens, like it could be hundreds of different things, and sometimes I come across projects where I think, well, even if the project is successful, the tokens shouldn't be worth anything because they haven't properly connected the two together. There's this shockingly large number of projects where I think that. So I think it's an incredibly important point. If you could explain what's the token usage with Arweave.
I mean, the token usage is you use it to store data. It's very simple. You pay for data storage using the token.
Okay.
And then the token transfers to the miners that store the blocks, and there we go. But that bit's actually kind of interesting because we don't just transfer the whole transaction reward to the person that mines that given block, because of course the data storage is permanent, indefinite. So you need to distribute it over time. So what we do is we give a portion to the person that mines the block, and we also put a portion into a pool, and that pool is essentially distributed, over time. In exponentially way. Sorry?
Where is it distributed to?
So that is distributed to the miners, but crucially, it's not distributed to the miner that got the initial block reward. It's the subsequent block rewards, if that makes sense. So I put transaction into the network. Some of the reward goes to the guy that mines that block specifically, or girl, whoever, the person, the miner even, that mines the block. And then some of the reward goes into this pool, and now in the subsequent block that's mined, a very small portion of that pool is dispersed to that next miner, because that miner has taken part in the upkeep of the network, and so on indefinitely.
Okay, what's the incentive behind that? Does that relate to token velocity?
The incentive is actually really interesting. So one of the reasons, other than it just makes sense to pay people over time for storing data indefinitely, another part is that we actually relate the amount that you take out of the pool to the size of the recall block that was required to mine the next block.
Okay.
Okay. This means that there's a strong incentive still to mine big block to store old big blocks as well as small blocks. So otherwise you have this system where it's like, well, it actually works out without it, right? So you have a field of blocks that all have different sizes. People are naturally going to gravitate towards storing the small ones, right? But there's the game theory stuff that goes on here, which essentially means that because everyone's storing the small ones, it's actually sensible to store some of the big ones. Because essentially you're competing against fewer miners if that recall block is picked in the mining of the next block.
Yeah.
But we augment that as well with this taking a portion of the pool thing.
Okay. Yeah, I found that very interesting when reading about everything that you don't use the last block as the recall block. You use an entirely random one in the past, with the idea being that you want to incentivize everyone to store as many blocks as possible because they don't know which block is going to be selected, and therefore they have, if something is a rare block as you guys described it, then they have more incentive to actually hold that block because they have a greater chance of being the person who gets selected to mine the next block.
Yeah, at a technical level. Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about, you guys have your own blockchain, which is very impressive, has to be said. Why though? Why not use, so Ethereum's the popular one, I know that probably wouldn't be fast enough for you guys. Why not build on something like Hashgraph in the future if that comes out, or if EOS is successful?
Scalability is the answer. Nothing else can easily implement a block, which was necessary for what it was that we were doing. This is a problem that I don't really believe anyone else has solved. So, and it's interesting, like you see people talk about scalability. The question is, okay, scalability of what? Like, is it the transaction throughput, or is it the data stored on the system, like how large the blockchain can get? Or is it that you don't need to store the old blocks at all, which is something that some, I was going to call them blockchains, but they're not. They're kind of decentralized incentive networks. It's something that they're doing. So you got to be specific about it. But in our case, we need to store vast amounts of data on the weave itself, and we just can't do that with anything else that existed.
Do you know about whether EOS and Hashgraph have thought about those aspects? Because I was reading about Ethereum the other day, and I was shocked to find out, like, storing 1 megabyte file on the chain, it costs like so ridiculous amount of money. Is that? Yeah. I guess that was one of the driving factors. You know, whether EOS and Hashgraph have thought of that sort of thing, whether that could potentially be applicable as well, or whether they're just focusing on the transaction throughput, as you say.
Yeah, I think the transaction throughput and the scalability of smart contracts as well is the focus right now. Those guys. And smart contract scalability is actually, it's completely unrelated to our project, but it is a really interesting area. It was actually one of the reasons we chose to build the decentralized application architecture that we did. So we saw that basically you have some fundamental problems with decentralized computation, in that you either get everyone to come to consensus about what it is that's happening, which is fine, but that means that for every extra computer in the system and for every extra program, you just duplicate all those programs over all of those computers. It's not like you split up the work at all. You just increase it. Or you do this thing where you say, okay, we'll have a side channel where you and I are transacting, and we'll say, okay, we'll both run this contract together, and then if we disagree about it, we'll get the network to come to consensus about what should actually happen. But that's not decentralized computation, that's guided computation, right? It's verified computation, but it's not, I put it on a magic sort of global computer and it just runs. Yeah, so what we decided to do instead was decentralize the storage of data. And in that way, yeah, you can make it so that you can build, create, read, update applications, stuff like web applications, blogs, Twitter, probably shouldn't mention their names, social media applications on top of a blockchain-like thing in a decentralized manner, trivially, in whatever programming language you like, and you can get started in like half an afternoon. Yeah.
Okay. That's a good point. So you guys, I read that you guys are going to allow decentralized applications to be built on top of your blockchain. Is that correct?
Yeah, completely.
Okay. So how do you view yourself then? Is it more that you're an infrastructure project and this is the first decentralized application and that's where you want to take it in the future? Or is it that this is your whole focus and you're just allowing other people to? Do you know what I mean? Like Ethereum's not building decentralized applications themselves. They're just focused on the protocol there. What's your area of focus?
So we're an infrastructure project, but we do have some forays into actually building applications. And I think this is really important because if you look at the landscape at the moment, the space, there's an awful lot of really strong infrastructure projects out there, but I don't see very many really strong applications. So I think in order to get people to adopt it, you've got to take the first move, and show people what they can do there. So yeah, we have a few forays in that area. Like for example, on June 8th, you'll be able to download this web extension that we have that allows you to archive internet pages permanently and in a decentralized manner, so that you can prove what they said at a certain time, or you can just there's a web page you really like and you want to make sure that if the webmaster, I'm not sure anyone ever uses that word anymore, but the person maintaining the website stops paying for it, then you still have access to that information.
So your focus is more on the infrastructure side then? I'm surprised because reading through all your documentation and everything, I thought it was more that you're building it so you can build your own decentralized application.
No, I'd say we're 80-20 infrastructure product. Yeah.
Okay.
But that's definitely shifted over time. We started as attempting to build a way of storing actually news articles with a particular focus in a decentralized manner, so that authoritarian regimes couldn't alter or remove them after the fact, so that humans had like a permanent record of history, if you like. That was where we started. Then we realized in order to solve that problem, you just build a generic permanent information storage system that could be used for all sorts of other things. So we expanded it out so that people can contribute applications to sort of wider mission of building a permanent record of human history and knowledge.
Okay, so let's talk about the democratic content policy. I watched the presentation you gave, and someone gave you a really hard time at the end of it with one of the questions, which I thought was kind of bullshit, to be honest, because they were basically trying to get at the point that you should have a blockchain where you can put on anything you want, which I don't agree with at all, because there is definitely some stuff that we don't want stored permanently. And you also, like, part of the main reasons behind your project is you don't want a single person to be able to say what should be and what shouldn't be. So you're applying more of a democratic role instead.
Yeah.
So how exactly would that work?
So essentially, well, it's based on a system of voluntarism, which is that you can't force people to do something in a system like this. You can't say, store all this data regardless of what you think of it. It just doesn't work. You need to have a voluntary participation on the part of the miner. In order to do that in an effective way, in a reasonable way, you have to allow each miner to say what it is that they won't store in the system, or won't serve either. So each miner maintains a blacklist of different content types that they won't work with. And then basically you vote on it, just like you do everything else in a blockchain system. and when information is added to the system, it's, if more than 51% of the hashing power in the network, or more than 50% of the hashing power in the network says to reject it, then it just doesn't make its way onto the weave. But what's really interesting about this, we think, is that there's actually a very, very small sliver of content that there is cross-cultural agreement shouldn't be stored on these kinds of networks. Mm-hmm. And so because it's a global effort and each individual person is allowed to tailor their blacklist just to the way that they like, we actually think that there'll be like a small sliver of content that everyone in the world can agree just shouldn't be on this thing, that isn't on this thing, and everything else will be acceptable. But it's up to the network to decide ultimately.
Okay.
Yeah, that particular guy, I think, it's funny. Like, you can't please everyone.
He was from Coin, I'm sure.
Sorry,
he was from Coin, I'm sure. He's one of their spokesmen. Yeah. So still related to this point, you also spoke in that presentation. Basically, having too many miners is potentially a bad thing because you have more people around the world that have to come to consensus, which slows down the whole mechanism. I think you kind of just threw out the number. I don't know how accurate it is, that maybe if it got to 10,000, that would be too many miners, and you would, like, the worst miners wouldn't necessarily stay in the system. I was thinking, if you effectively plan to reduce the number of miners, so say it's something like 5,000 people, and you describe your project as like the backbone for the internet, the permanent data storage. If you have only 5,000 people voting on the democratic content, it's only 5,000 votes worldwide. How democratic would you say that really is?
So it kind of scales, basically. Like the larger the network gets, the larger the larger the amount of data stored in the network gets, the larger the number of actors will be allowed into the system. But it's not like it's actually gated. It's simply a product of what the wildfire system does, which is that it ranks other people in terms of how much bandwidth they can offer. And if you drop too far down the list, or no, it's not even that you drop too far down the list. If you're just not useful to the network, you will be removed. But if you are useful to the network, then you stay. So as it gets larger, more people dedicate more serious effort to being miners in the system. The number of miners in the system increases. It's really just a case of, like, if you are slowing down the network won't have you in it for long.
I guess the aspect that I'm interested in is, if you have that potentially few miners around the world, you could, you could in theory work together and store something which the rest of other people may not want, but with a lower number, it's easier to have collusion. So how would you guys combat that?
Yeah, I mean, this comes to one of the broader problems in the whole blockchain space, which is that we have this idea of voting, but we vote with hash power, which is actually bought. So, I mean, I think that's a whole separate question, about the distribution of power in these networks. It's great to have decentralized networks because everything is transparent, at least, but it does actually generally, in most of the extant cases, mean that the power builds up in a few people's hands. But yeah, this is a sort of broader problem. And we have some interesting ideas about how we can change the proof of work algorithm that underlies the proof of access algorithm so that it more closely mimics Satoshi's idea of one CPU, one vote. But we'll see. That's Arweave 2.0.
Okay. So, yes, that's very common at the moment. A lot of projects are talking about making their blockchains ASIC resistant to allow regular people to start mining again competitively.
Yeah, I mean, it's a nice idea, but there's a lot of bad approaches, I think, being taken at the moment. Or approaches that are just going to last for like 10 minutes before the ASIC builder's like, oh, okay, so I just tweak this and boom, it works again. Yeah.
Could you elaborate on that a little bit? What do you view as potentially working and what's not so good in your opinion?
So some of the approaches are just like, oh, well, don't worry about it. We'll just tweak a few parameters in the algorithm and then we'll continue. And then, those ASIC miners will be thrown off. That doesn't work very well at all. Or even changing to another hashing algorithm in general doesn't work very well. Because, broadly speaking, ASICs are simply specific hardware built for a specific task, and hashing algorithms are a specific task. So the idea that you can build one that isn't, that's ASIC resistant is just kind of like, probably not. You need to take a totally different approach. One of the ones we've been looking at really closely is the idea of GenProg. So, okay, you've got this problem that like the proof of work is generally pretty specific. So it's specific enough you can build hardware that solves it quickly. So why don't you make it so that the computation that's involved is general purpose? So you're actually just running a random program. And in doing so, you can't make a piece of hardware, basically, you can try, that is faster than a normal CPU to do general purpose computation, because what's a CPU designed for? High capacity general purpose computation. So if you generate a random program, and then the proof of work is somehow related to running that program and then verifying the result of it, then you might be able to make gains in that area. And the way that we're looking at doing it is you generate the random string of instructions from the, maybe this is too much technical detail, I don't know
No, carry on. This is
okay. So you take the hash of the last block, you use that as a random number generator seed, which then creates a reproducible by every other miner in the system string of instructions, and then each miner will start at a random offset in that field, in that string of instructions, and they're essentially running it to see if they can get to a certain number, and they're running like 100 steps or something. So they jump to position 8,000,001, and then they run the program for 100 steps, and they see if the output is a certain number, like 1,000 or something. And if it is, then they say, oh, okay, great, that's the proof of work done. I can send this position 8,001 or whatever it was to everyone else in the network, and they can quickly verify, right, just by running 100 steps that is indeed correct. But it's extremely difficult to find, right, because you have to find a position to run the program from. So it has that facet of being easy to verify, very hard to find, and it's general purpose. So it would be extremely difficult to make an ASIC that did it quickly.
Okay, that's very interesting. One of the aspects I always find interesting is that basically you create a decentralized system, and it creates decentralized incentives, but then people always like to form centralization around it. So like with Bitcoin, economies of scale, and suddenly you have a level of centralization within decentralization. So it's kind of a very fascinating debate for me to kind of see how the decentralization almost comes back and tries to break that up. I think it's always something we're going to be tangling with, because there's always going to be financial incentives to create centralization around all of these blockchains.
Yeah, well, I think it's a fact of life at this level, because if you think about it, the thing that makes all these systems run is greed, right? Like the miners want to get as many tokens as possible. Great, we can use that to do useful things for everyone else. Like that's incentive engineering. But at the base of it, we're using this selfish desire of people to do things. And the thing is, if you make it so that something's profitable, there is going to be a group of people that take those profits and reinvest it in doing the thing that was profitable, right? So in all cases, even in this GenProg system that I was just speaking about, you just get people that are going to buy more CPUs. I think it comes down to like, almost close to a natural law that these things follow a Pareto distribution. It's, it stacks up in one corner. And I think that's just something we're going to have to, it's a constant battle to try and make sure that it doesn't go too far, but it is a natural fact of what it is that we're doing.
Yeah, it's always going to be there. There's always going to be this battle going on. Right, so going back to Arweave, let's talk about sort of obviously from the business perspective, what do you view as being the biggest challenges over the coming years? It could be regulation, adoption. What is it that you guys are the biggest hurdle you think you have to overcome?
It's adoption, for sure. It's just like every other infrastructure project. We're positioning ourselves so that every developer can pick it up in whatever programming language they use, and they can get started in half an afternoon is the target time, and we're pretty much at that. But we need to make the documentation perfect. We need to make like hundreds of YouTube tutorials telling people how to do it in Ruby, Python, PHP, JavaScript, Java, Erlang, whatever it is that they use. And then we need to go out and tell people why they should build decentralized applications. Although, honestly, I think the centralized institutions are doing that job for us pretty well. But we can push them on the way.
So how are you going to try to overcome adoption then? Because I guess it's like a chicken and the egg scenario with just about every cryptocurrency project, that you have to get people mining, but then people aren't going to want to mine unless people are wanting to store on the Arweave, and you have to back and forth. Have you got a plan to overcome that first jump?
So we can thank Filecoin for doing a lot of the work for us on the mining front, because they came out, they made a big splash, and they were like, hey, we're going to mine with hard drives. So a whole bunch of people went out and bought a whole bunch of hard drives. And now, as soon as they hear about the Arweave, it's like, oh, now I can actually use them for something. So, we've already had like the 4th largest miner in the world who bought a bunch of hard drives preparing for mining Filecoin. Yeah, they're moving over to us. And then this proof of interest thing that we had for the whitelist for our community sale. Yeah, the number of people that have said, I'm moving from SEER, or I bought the hard drives for Filecoin, I want to use them on your system. It's huge. Okay. So yeah, from the mining side, we got some really good traction already.
Yeah.
And from adoption, it's about getting the developer experience as good as possible, and then getting it in front of the eyes of as many developers as possible. And we also have this thing that we call the semi-autonomous fund, which is essentially a funnel, right? So as people progress through the funnel, or up the pyramid, if you like, even, of producing a successful Arweave application, we give them a larger and larger reward. So if you go out today, you build a GitHub repo, you put a README in it that says, I'm going to build an application that does, I don't know, Uber for cats that's decentralized. Whatever it happens to be, we'll give you a small number of R tokens, or hopefully something better than that. But you get started with something, we give you a few R tokens. You get it so that you can transmit a transaction onto the network. You give us the transaction ID, we give you some more tokens. And then as you progress through the process of pushing more and more on-chain transactions, the reward gets bigger and bigger through a kind of Series A, Series B, Series C funding system that's, essentially supports startups.
Okay, so you guys have very clearly thought of that then. The mining side is very well established, and obviously providing financial incentives for people to get something for free. That should be quite easy to encourage people to store stuff with you. Okay, where do you view the project in 5 years from now? What's your role in the ecosystem? So kind of going, I guess, maybe relating to the question earlier of whether companies like, I can't remember the name, Alicia or something, you're going to replace them maybe, or...
Oh, Elspeth.
Yeah, sorry. So
no problem.
For me.
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay.
2 interviews is too much talking. I think in 5 years' time we might be starting up the slope to where we really want to get to, which is to be the place for humanity to store the data that they need to refer back to in the long term. And I think when we get to, I don't know whether it'll be 5 years or maybe 10 years, but that's going to snowball. As soon as people start to see, hey, there's this box, if you like, that I can just put stuff into, and it will be there forever. That's hugely powerful, and as more people start to use it, it's just going to compound in effect. But no doubt, we got to bridge the gap between here and there first, and so that's where we have this. We're first approaching blockchain appliances that need somewhere to store their data, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
I don't know whether we'll be. I expect if we built products on top of the system at that point, the products are really to show people why it's useful to start with, and to kickstart the ecosystem. If they get to the point where people really want to use them, they get a lot of adoption, then we'll likely just spin them out into something else. The core of the system, or the core of the company, as much as that's an appropriate structure for the thing, is focused on helping the ecosystem thrive.
Okay, very interesting. We've just got a couple of questions left.
Sure.
The penultimate one, I'm always interested to know what projects you may be looking at yourself. Obviously, being in the industry, you probably have people you've spoken to with inside contacts. What are the projects that you're really interested in?
I like the interoperability stuff. I think that's going to be huge. So I won't name names, but that's an area I'd look.
Okay.
And for reasons that might come clear later, perhaps. But yeah, definitely, interoperability is a big thing. If you like, what we've done to some extent is build like these CPUs, decentralized global CPUs, which is the smart contract systems. And we feel that we've built this global decentralized hard drive. One of the key things that's required to make all of this infrastructure work is a motherboard to put it all on, right? And yeah, there are some people working on really good stuff in that area. Yeah, I would look into it.
Okay. And our final question for everyone watching this video who's made it this far. What takeaway message would you like to give them? Could be cryptocurrency related, could be Arweave, could be literally anything. What would you like to leave them with?
Well, I don't know.
Hard question.
Decentralize. but really, yeah. No.
Okay.
It's an exciting place to be in an exciting time.
Mm-hmm.
I think we might be watching something, well, we'll see, won't we? But the world is changing rapidly at the moment. I'll be interested to see where we as a community end up, or like what portion of that we take. Okay,
that's a good message. We'll leave it at that. Well, thank you very much for joining me today, Sam. It's been very enjoyable to learn more about Arweave. It's a very interesting project, and I hope everyone watching this has enjoyed this interview as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks, it's been great.
So that was me speaking with Sam from Arweave. The first thing I'd like to say is a massive thank you to Sam for joining us on the channel. I know he's very, very busy. He just finished an interview beforehand. So I'd like to thank him for taking the time out of his day and chatting with me on the channel. Now I'd like to throw it over to you guys to offer some constructive criticism to me. If there's anything you don't like about the video, maybe the structure, maybe the way I ask the questions, maybe the questions themselves, please let me know in the comment section, because this interview style is very new for me and it's definitely stuff that I need to improve on. So I'd love some feedback from you guys so I know exactly what I need to work on as well. If you've enjoyed the video, then please consider giving it a thumbs up. It takes me a lot of effort to make these videos. It would be massively appreciated. And if you'd like to see more content like this, then please hit that subscription button. On this channel, we're talking about ICO and cryptocurrencies, particularly with an eye on the investing side. So if that interests you, this could well be the channel for you. Anyway, I'm gonna wrap the video up there, guys. From Tom here at Crypto Gurus, thank you so much for watching, and we will speak again very soon.